All right, hey y'all, I'm Jeffrey Rickman. This is Plain Spoken, and on this is a YouTube channel. It's on Substack. It's everywhere. I'm trying to kind of saturate the market because a big goal of mine has been to help local churches in the Methodist sphere, especially in the United Methodist Church, have good information. I started this whenever I was still in the United Methodist Church, and so were the two churches that I served. I've since disaffiliated, and I'm a global Methodist elder at this time, but there are still many churches and sincere believers who are left behind and trapped. Recently, the Judicial Council in the United Methodist Church ruled that not even paragraph 2549 can be used as a disaffiliation provision anymore, meaning that, at any time, individuals can walk away from the church, but if they at all want to steward the resources entrusted to them by previous generations, they're just not able to do that. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of churches that would like to leave the United Methodist Church now that it has changed its official stance on sexual morality and the doctrines it preaches around the fall, and how seriously it can preach the articles of religion. All these things were a problem long before, but they've been made explicit now. But the door is effectively shut. And so I have a heart for churches that are feeling trapped and don't really know what to do, that are trying to organize, trying to make responsible decisions to administer their churches responsibly. So I'm not going to pretend to have an answer for every church. I think this is a very complicated situation, but I think churches can better discern what they need to do as they look at other churches. So the church in Blaine, South Carolina, spelled Belin, it's a big church, and I've heard about them for a long time. South Carolina's been a weird context. I've tried to report on them a little bit. I'm sure I've done a terrible job, but I think learning about them, I recently reported on them. They had a meeting earlier this month where things did not go well. But I conveyed an interest to allowing someone else to tell their story, because a firsthand account is always better than a secondhand account. So I've actually got a guest today, and in order to understand this church community, this is the actual official name is Merle's Inlet Blaine Memorial United Methodist Church, and it is a big church. Average attendance of 2,400, more than 2,400 people any given Sunday. And then this is where it is in South Carolina. It's in a very nice area, and it's a big growth area, and we may or may not talk about that. But this church is really pushing to get free if it can, really just to have the conversation. I don't know for a fact, and I don't know if our guest is going to give us any clarity about where the majority of people are. I just know that they're not even allowed to have the conversation right now. So at this point, I want to turn to my guest today, Dan Temple. Welcome, Dan. How are you today?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for making the time. And just right off the bat, tell us in what capacity you're speaking. How much do you represent the average churchgoer at Blaine?
Yeah, I don't know that I represent one member more than the other, but I'm just I'd say, young professional in our town. I have three children, married, grew up at the church, and a lot of us were so busy before COVID, through COVID, we kind of kept an eye on the rumor mill and just weren't really engaged. Some people have said, well, just because you were asleep at the wheel doesn't mean that you can't be out politicked. And I just, as I lay in bed at night, I think about how wrong, just because some higher ups had a head start, how wrong it is to say one thing and do another. And my objective, kind of since I got involved only 45, 60 days ago, was to get as much information out as quickly as possible, because after Judicial Council, um, we started seeing churches not pay apportionments. And then what would that do as, the budgetary constraints hit the South Carolina Conference? So I'm a CPA in South Carolina. I saw some of your old Excel spreadsheets. I was asked to do this podcast with you, but I actually haven't watched a lot of your stuff. A lot of people have referenced your material, but do you have an accounting background yourself?
I do not. I just like knowing what I'm talking about. You're probably talking about the spreadsheet I did where I looked at how many disaffiliations per annual conference, and I stole some of that from UMC stuff, but I've maintained it and done some kind of comparative work. And my wife likes spreadsheets, so I've made that available to some people. I haven't updated it for a bit. Could you remind me how many churches were able to well, okay, so your conference never used 2548, no, 2553. You only used 2549, which is properly the church closure. And as I recall, a couple hundred churches were able to get out using that measure last year, right?
Yeah, looking back at your numbers and things I say need to be fact checked. I have a lot of numbers and I think I have good basis for saying them. But as far as I know, we had roughly 1,000 churches in our annual conference. Roughly a quarter to 20% left on the first tranche between 2022, 23, whichever year you want to call it, 23, 24, technically because of the wrap up piece. But so 25% left, roughly 200 to 300 were in discernment. But again, that got cut short. But I think roughly half were making their way out of the conference.
Yeah, I didn't think to pull it up before now, but I can pull it up now. This is the spreadsheet that I had, and I'll get you and me on screen here so that I can see what I want. But yeah, we had, let's see, it looks like 114 were able to get out, which was just over 10%.
Well, that was 2022. Then 23, they allowed churches out.
Oh, so that's how ancient my spreadsheet is now. It's not updated
Right.
for 2023.
And we do have an accounting firm, and I had folks go back and actually count and then add the apportionments from the last audited financial budget to kind of put a percentage on that. And we'll get into why I got involved in November, but roughly 25%, Jeffrey, but 40 to 50% of the apportionments. We're the fourth largest church in our state, or were the first largest left. It was, I think, Mount Horeb in Lexington near Columbia, our state capital. Bunkum in Greenville was able to separate, and then a couple others were in discernment. But we represent 30% of the Marion district now. But the 25% equals roughly 40% of the total apportionments, if that makes any sense.
It does. And there has been some preliminary reporting done on the denomination wide level showing that giving as a whole has significantly dropped off since the general conference last year. Although I don't think we've had reports from the last, I shouldn't say I don't think your denomination now has had reports in the last couple of months, but it looks like there's been a huge shortfall in giving, not just in your conference, but that's one of the ways in which people are able to speak, even if they can't leave, is how much money they're willing to even give to the structure that's done this. So the impression you've given so far is that South Carolina still has a number of churches that would like to be free but can't. Do I have the right impression?
Presumably. And who knows where Blaine is with the whole thing. If you actually took the congregants, I think the congregants, those numbers, we had 2,800 members, I think, in our directory of 2023. Obviously, a lot of people have left in disgust. And, our senior pastor, Reverend Millambry, sent out a letter on October 29th that said we will remain UMC. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I know this will sadden some and make others happy. And I think we had a great community. We have 10,000 people, if you Google it, that live in Murrells Inlet. 2,800 would consider themselves professing members of our church. So 30% of the people that live in our town attended our church.
Really?
Yeah, so I grew up here. It's a big deal to me, and I'm friends with everybody on, you would say, the other side. Everybody has been of the opinion that we want Blaine to stay just the way it is. But, I kind of want to go through a timeline of events. But
Yeah.
as the rules change, you start to see the progressivism or things come out where you say, well, that doesn't make any sense for Blaine. And I think that people on both sides would agree. But, are you staying loyal to your vows by staying United Methodist, or are you staying loyal by asking questions and asking for the church to vote? One of our council members on the 6th said, I'd rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in our directory than 9 judicial council members in San Francisco. So it's just, I think everybody wants Blaine to continue to be a pillar in our community. It's a great church. We have great leadership at a pastoral level. Our council people are great. I just think there's a dichotomy on viewpoints. And I can just speak to how much I got involved over the last 60 days, but that doesn't mean a lot of other stuff was not going on before I got involved. And I can't speak to that, but I think I can hit on kind of the mobilization that occurred at
Just a
Blaine.
couple things up front before we do the timeline, and I think that's a really helpful way to line this out. But you've been a member of that church since 1988. Have you been in consistent attendance since that time? Because I'm trying to anticipate suspicions of people who are not friendly as they look at this. There are some who, since disaffiliation, have re-entered in after a season away and are trying to make waves. Is that you, or have you been consistently involved all the way through?
Yeah, I don't think it matters as much, but I do think it helps to color myself. I certainly was colored on January 6th because we went through nominations and people were elected from the floor during a charge conference, which we'll get into. But yeah, I grew up here. I say 88, but that's the year I was born. I was baptized by Bob Morris in our old sanctuary, which is in the adjacent lot, and attended all through K through 12, and parents and everything else, youth group. I played in JC and the Sunshine Band. I was the drummer. Went to college, went to Clemson University, and came back with my wife to practice accounting. And we have three children, so getting to church was sometimes difficult over the past years, and that lines up perfectly with COVID. But I've been in regular attendance, online or in person. We wrote a letter to council and just said we would stop attending after May 3rd because we did not wholly subscribe to the changes in the United Methodist Church Book of Discipline, but I continue to watch online and I continue to give. And we count online viewership as an attendance number. But I've tried to stay faithful to staying engaged, and I was really of the wait and see until May 3rd. And then I started asking when we're going to get to vote under 2549, and then called some people I knew on the other side and just said, is it time now? And we had taken a church survey in between, and some people were leaning on that. And I have those numbers too, but
Oh, good.
I wasn't super engaged until after October 29th.
That's helpful. And then whether you do it in the store as you recount what's happened, or you can do it right now, I think for people to trust an account that they're given, the person sharing has to fess up to any misbehavior on their own end. So, like, something that I am absolutely certain is not going to be able to, not going to be difficult to summon is the conference saying things that they didn't actually do, or setting things up dishonestly. This has happened in almost every conference. But I think as people listen to your story, it will be helpful if you can say, people with my sympathies who are not happy with the direction of the denomination, this was something silly that we did at this time, or something that we said that was not helpful. And if there is nothing, then there is nothing. But I just think that that sort of storytelling, if we get to, and I'm not telling you how to tell your story, I don't know your story, but I'm just saying
Sounds
there are going to be
fine.
a lot of people who watch this, and if there's no admission of any kind of weakness or something on the side that's wanting to be able to talk, then it's going to feel like propaganda. And then, reality
Absolutely.
is reality, but tell the story however it is. But I just wanted
Well,
to.
no, I think it makes sense to address some things up front because I wasn't necessarily involved. I told you I was uneasy about doing this interview because I'm not on social media.
Mhm,
I don't think it's a great place to be to spend my time and focus my efforts. We've certainly been busy with everything else, but
mhm.
our church wasn't really engaged in the conversation until folks that call them the Friends of Blaine, Friends to Preserve Blaine, something of that nature were created, and I wasn't involved at all. I was excited for their efforts and appreciative for them stepping out, trying to gain more knowledge. I was at a church golf tournament the first time I heard of the Friends of to Preserve Blaine, and I was excited that they were meeting, and they just got so colored with some malicious, or they were painted it with some broad strokes. And I think then they defended themselves in a way that wasn't put in the best light. And I don't know that they regret it, but I think it got personal in a small community, and that's regretful. I think our senior leadership may have been hurt by it. And I really respect our pastors and our clergy and our pastoral cabinet, and would have hated for them to get defamed in any way, because that's not right. I don't think that's what our intentions are. But and I'd say from my own personal perspective as an accountant, I was trying to dig through the numbers, and I probably, in regards to apportionments,
Mhm.
I probably misspoke, thinking that our apportionment factor may increase as the denominator decreases of churches that leave. In our conference, I called and I said, I'd like to speak to the conference treasurer, Miss Beth Westbury, and she said, "This is she." I said, "Well, great. Hey, Miss Westbury, my name's Dan. I'm a CPA in Myrtle Beach, and I was just trying to get some more information about the cash position of the conference." And she goes, "Well, would you like to see the audited financials?" I said, "That'd be great." So she ripped over the Elliott Davis financials from 2023, and you can clearly see the balance sheet change and the monies that came over from the disaffiliated churches, net unrealized increase in assets. And the conference has plenty of money. Our conference the trustees had allocated 1.2 million to offset or ramp down the apportionment decrease. They could apply many more dollars if they needed to. And I think the main part I may have missed early on in November was alarming people to maybe a doubling of apportionments. I think that's possible. I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, yeah. If I could just for the audience explain a little bit about United Methodist finances, and I'm not an expert, but I was in the Oklahoma Annual Conference, and there are differences between conferences, but generally speaking, there's a decimal. They call it a decimal that each church is responsible for based on two or three or four factors. I forget what, but they recalculate that on a, I think usually an annual basis. So there's a total budget that they have to meet, and then they divvy that up among the churches according to this decimal. So as you talk about these things shifting, there's a large number of churches in South Carolina that have left. When they left, according to the disaffiliation agreement that South Carolina had, they had to pay probably at least 2 years of apportionments plus maybe some extra. So there would be a big influx of money that went to the annual conference. It's a whole other issue of whether or not that goes to the general church. I suspect that's going to cause problems down the line. That's not what we're talking about. Right now, what we're talking about is how much then falls on the local churches that are left behind to make up for that budget shortfall.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really when I got engaged. So October 29th happened, Halloween, and then kind of came up for air. And some local churches had, in our district and others, had started writing letters to the annual conference saying, "We're withholding apportionments." We stood by faithfully and patiently waiting for the ability to discern under 2549. And in our state, you've hit on this in the one that I watched about South Carolina. Bishop Holston, who was replaced by Bishop Fairley, had gone forward with our trustees, and in the 2024 affirmed our ability to leave under 2549. Whether or not that was their original intent, but I think churches had left under 2549 versus 2553. But then that door was slammed in October. But if you believe they were mobilizing, then you would understand that the kicking the can down the road to wait till the rules were changed in May of 2024, if they changed the rules and now say 2549 is illegal, then as I lay awake in bed at night, I think, well, gosh, if they knew that, then of course we could go prove that they concealed the information with a kind of a malicious intent. But who knows? I don't know that our conference had a malicious intent, or Bishop Holston or Fairley, but I think if you look at the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterians, they knew they needed to mobilize after those cases were settled. We live in a neutral principles of law state. So that's what we'll get into on the timeline as well. But you needed to control the vestry or the council to really control the church. And I think through nominations and other mobilization, sending senior leadership that had more of a progressive agenda. All that kind of made sense when you saw the changing of the tide and understood what position you needed to be in when the day came that the rules did change.
For the sake of, I'm thinking of churches that are not happy in the UMC and their leadership is watching right now. I want to make sure you're tracking the different things that Dan is talking about. Some of the history is worth repeating. 2553 was designed by a victorious conservative majority in the 2019 special called annual general conference that was meant as a gracious exit for liberal churches that couldn't stomach the denomination's direction. It galvanized far left progressive entities that took over the denomination through nominations at the annual conference level. It was signaled in jurisdictional conferences a couple of years ago, and I reported on all that on Plain Spoken. But then at this last general conference, well, it wasn't even, so 2553 was set to sunset at the end of 2024. So at the end of, no, 2023. Yeah. Golly, it's been a long time since 2553 expired.
We're really in 25, so a couple of years ago.
Oh my gosh. So it sunsetted, and then like people outside of the U.S. could never even utilize it anyway. There was all kinds of hook and crook that we can't go into right now. But 2549 was a church closer provision. So 2553 was a proper disaffiliation provision. 2549 was for closing a church, and it was being used by South Carolina and a few other places to close churches and sell them back to the people who were running them for a reasonable price. It was effectively disaffiliation. West Virginia was another one. So, but in the midst of that, there were a lot of churches that said, hey, should we go ahead and do this? And then some bishops and many DSs said, no, that's really too fast. Wait and see what happens at General Conference. And then regardless of what happens, we'll let you get where you need to go. So Alabama, West Florida definitely did that. Was there much explicit language like that in South Carolina?
Yeah, and I shared a small snippet that I'd like to either play or go over. But, the good people of Blaine voted us into discernment. The Friends of Blaine led kind of the charge, and we got counsel. We have a large council to allow Blaine to study it from the October. It was late October where we entered discernment. And then all of a sudden they call a charge conference to give us the information that, hey guys, you're voting on, or you're discerning on the current book of discipline as is. Nothing's changed. How could you possibly discern over something that hasn't yet changed? We should wait, we should see, and remove the arbitrary deadlines. When you don't know what 10% of your value is, you don't know what the new rules are going to be. There may be regionalization, there may be this and that. So between, I call it the flip-flop vote of October 23, we were in it. Everybody was happy, and some council members didn't even come to the charge conference in November because we had no idea you could be pulled out of discernment. So if you have the clip, I'd like to kind of start there, and then that goes through, kind of kicks off the mass exodus from Blaine, from some people that didn't want to stick around.
So this is the charge conference on November 12th of 23?
Yeah, it was really what kind of drove a wedge between our church, and it was unfortunate. So this is our district superintendent, Steve Brown, and he now leads this charge conference that was called after we were in discernment. So here we're in November of 23 in discernment, and they brought in the district superintendent to tell us the truth of what was really going on.
The church can say, we cannot continue as we are as an effective United Methodist church. And this is the word United Methodist. Therefore, we will close as a United Methodist church. And with that, the resources come to the conference, but the conference in the agreement says we will send them or pay you, you can pay us for them at 10% roughly. It's a 10% thing of what your value of properties, et cetera, are all related to. And so that paragraph is not going away and is available anytime, any place. There is a calendar constraint in terms of a process that has to take a church conference vote by March 1st. But whether you did that or not, entering discernment or not, that's what I'm trying to say this in terms without trying to take any side, is to say that the process is available for you anytime you choose to. If you can choose to continue, is still available. Whether you make those dates or not is your choice in how you choose to proceed. If you choose not to, it's available always at another time as well. So I don't want that to be misconstrued. But the vote before us, which I think you're ready for the vote, is to decide whether you want to continue. The motion before us is to cease the process of discernment at this time in the life of Blaine United Methodist Church. To vote against the motion is to say or to indicate you'd like to continue in the discernment process at this time as Blaine United Methodist Church. The only persons eligible to vote at this meeting are only those on the church council. Again, we have removed those who might be clergy with charge conference relationship here, but of course are not members of the church because they belong to the annual conference, whether this annual conference or another annual conference. So those that are voting online can indicate in the chat their vote. Those that are present, if you will stand, we'll pass out the ballots. I'm going to make sure we have.
Was that
That's
good?
right. Yeah, that's right before we took the vote. And if that's not heavy-handed, if you go back and rewatch it, and that's available on YouTube, the district superintendent, who our senior leadership or pastor always defers to, says it'll be available to you anytime at any place. And we were in discernment, and then that vote flipped 29-20. Like I said, we have a large conference. So if you think about the last 18 months, that would be a big day or a big turning point in our church, where it was an opportunity to leave under 2553. Our neighboring churches, one in Litchfield, South Carolina, and one in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, both left. And you go to those churches. I went once. It's called St. Paul's, and I went after the October meeting where our pastor said we have no option to leave anymore, and I was trying to figure it out. I went one time, and it was disheartening to see people crying in the parking lot. Here we are at a Methodist church where we're also Methodist, but they're afforded the opportunity because maybe they don't represent as much of a budget constraint to the annual conference. Maybe they weren't infiltrated soon enough, or whatever reason, but it just didn't make any sense to me that a church 5 miles down the road could have such a different story. And I think the unfortunate part for Blaine is that we were too attractive, or too, like I told you earlier, the most people in the country are moving to our county is Horry County. I think it's the fastest growing county in the country. Blaine's in Horry County, South Carolina. And it has roughly $25 million in assets. Our property was appraised at $18 million, and that's only for religious purposes. So there was probably a deduction or discount for valuation there. And then we have roughly $5 to $6 million in cash reserves that are designated funds, which I'll get into in a second. But I got involved when I saw those members crying about what had happened at Blaine and that we would never get a chance to vote. I said, well, golly, some of these other churches are going to get something because they're withholding apportionments. There's going to be the same thing that happened in South Carolina. It was a big Episcopal case where they were able to leave with their real property. So it didn't seem to be the end of it for me, but I went and met with the senior pastor and the church administrator on December 4th to kind of tell them what I was going to be looking at. And then I got to work from there.
Do you know if on the church deed, if they ever put the trust clause in there, if they noted the United Methodist Church as a trustee of the property?
So our church was founded in 1925. This weekend we celebrate our centennial celebration. It's really a big deal for Murrells Inlet. It's a pillar of our community. But so the Blaine Trust would be the original trust from Reverend Blaine to the congregants, or for to have a Methodist church. Like many other churches, we operated, I think you call it, as a religious association until the late 90s, where we were encouraged by the United Methodist Church to incorporate. At that point, we did reference the Methodist Church in one of the deeds, but the Methodist Trust is referenced, but not the United Methodist Trust clause. It just says Methodist Trust. And in 4 of the other deeds, it is not referenced. But again, even if it were referenced in our state, in the Episcopal case, it's valid only insofar that you remain faithful to the original principles and intent of the trust. If you breach trust, the argument others would have is that makes the trust invalid.
So for churches that are watching this in other contexts, there are going to be very varying factors that impact your church. One of it's just going to be in what state are you in? Are you in a neutral principle state, which is where the government is willing to interpret religious contracts, so long as it doesn't deal with doctrines, it can deal with obvious meanings of words. Or are you in a state that defers to ecclesiastical authority? That's one thing. And different states align differently. Generally, in the South and Midwest, differently than the Northeast and West Coast. And then also, was your church originally established as a trust by someone who made clear designations as to what they desired to be done and not done with the property? And then also with your foundational documents, what is noted about any denominational ties and affiliations and what happens under different contingencies. So there are many other factors as well, but these are some of the things that are coming to the fore. There are lawyers like I've interviewed Lloyd Lunsford, who explained a lot of this. So if you're interested in hearing the nuts and bolts of that, just look up Lloyd Lunsford, Plain Spoken. But also Dan Dalton, NCLL. There are a couple other firms that are getting into the nitty gritty on these things and pressing their case against different annual conferences in different ways. So in South Carolina, I would assume some of that's coming into play there. You may or may not want to get into that, but I know you were
Yeah,
willing to.
I think it's important.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important, and who knows where Blaine will end up, and I'll get into what we tried to do on January 6th. But like I said, originally I met with the senior pastor, Reverend Belin, and our church administrator, and I said, look, I'm going to try to go talk to as many people as I can to get as much information out as I can as quickly as possible. And I'm going to run through this because of the time constraints, but this is early December. What was happening at Blaine was our church leadership was going to roll over on March 5th. We passed a resolution, or they passed a resolution on September 9th, after we entered discernment in August, before Judicial Council, that said all of our council will remain until the March charge conference, till after the discernment process. We fought, or our group, our side, fought hard for co-chairs. We have a large council, and it was important to keep it intact and that made sense. Everybody voted for that in September. Well, nominations under our Book of Discipline, under section, I think, 258, I believe, it regards church leadership. Our nominations committee rolled off as of 1/1. It's the only, I think, committee that changes under the Book of Discipline, like where you cannot stay on. So I went to the senior pastor and I said, we have 3 conservative, if that's how we want to color them, people that are rolling off as of 1/1. Why not do nominations 5 months in advance of March? Meaning if March is going to change, then why aren't we doing the good work now with these 3 people? Well, the obvious answer is that they're rolling off. You're going to have a 6-person, not a 9-person committee. And then all 3 of our clergy voted at nominations. If you go to 258, it says the pastor shall be the chairperson, and it doesn't say pastors can vote, anything like that. So we questioned our senior leadership on that, and he said, well, the DS says that clergy means pastor, and I'm well within my rights to have all 3 clergy present and voting in a 9-member committee, not to mention a committee that's about to be 6 members as of 1/1. So all of our clergy also voted on every council vote. So if we lost the January 6th meeting, 3 of those votes were our clergy. We had 1 abstention, so I'm not sure. But I said, well, if our council is going to change on March 5th, then why don't we do nominations now? We then found out that it was not a closed meeting, that it was open, that it wasn't sworn to secrecy. They could enter executive council. So that's where I got involved outside of the finance piece. I'll color that briefly. We were a $4 to $5 million, some years $6 million church. Our budget this year will finish around, or our gross revenue will finish at 2.5. Mm-hmm. So I said to the minister, to Reverend Melambry, I said, he said, how can how can you be faithful through Christ through the United Methodist Church if you don't agree with the United Methodist Church? I said, well, certainly we could be stronger Methodist with a $5 million budget versus a $2 million budget. I mean, I don't know who's doing the right thing here. You may be doing God's will, or I may be trying to do God's will, but it'd certainly be worth looking at, so that we can have the biggest, best 3,000 member church that we had and do the most missionary work and have the largest budget to give to UMCOR or things like UMCOR. So that's where I was really coming from. It is, we did a survey back in June that said, it was 50-50 church, but it said 70% of our church would stay if we left. Only 50% of our church would stay if we remain United Methodist. And then that correlates strongly with the 5 million down to 2.5, and we think probably 2 million for 2025. Does that make
Give me
sense?
those numbers again. If you stay UMC, only half is going to stay. If you leave the UMC, how many are going to stay?
70.8%.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a clear disparity. Okay.
Yeah, but they argue, and again, I said it was a poll back in June, and the election was going on. I said, well, let's just call Kamala Harris the president because she's up in the polls. Let's forget about November 5th, and let's just use the poll results as of wherever we were in July when she had first become the nominee. And let's call it there. Let's not allow Americans to vote. Let's just go with the poll. So the poll said that, and people argued 50-50 church. We're never going to make it past 2/3. Under neutral principles of law states, there may be some argument where it's just a 51% plurality. But regardless, I would have liked to have seen a vote. I think a lot of people could have slept better on that. But we voted ourselves into discernment again in August. September, they passed a resolution to allow our members to stay on, our council members, through March. When I spoke to Reverend Malambry, I said, we have 3 million in designated funds. I said, is it your understanding that council could vote to release these designated funds to fund budget deficits for 3 years? He said yes. And I looked at our church administrator. He said yes. And I said, I'm not going to speak to the legality or the slippery slope that may put you on. But if you're trying to control the money, you need to control council. Also, as I did my research, the vestry in the Episcopal case would be the equivalent of our council in the Methodist case. So under neutral principles of law, if you control council, you control the corporate board of directors. So Belin just incorporated in 1999, but in effect, because of people being hired by the SPRC through recommendations, making budgetary decisions, our members knew that the council was the corporate board of directors. And that's what the January 6th meeting was about. So we worked very hard. The minister did call nominations in December. They had 2 meetings. I personally made it through nominations as the church treasurer. Then we found out he was calling the January 6th meeting as a charge conference, meaning the guy you saw speak, our district superintendent, Reverend Brown, I think he's Reverend Doctor, he was now going to attend. And we said, oh, great. Well, our original intent, meaning the people I had been meeting with, kind of waiting to see what would happen to basically drum up votes for the discernment vote, which we thought was going to happen in February. We were meeting and we said, well, gosh, what are these other churches doing? So initially we wanted to have a church conference under section 248 where we get a 10% petition and we go there. But lawyers were saying there's no way the district superintendent's going to allow you to have a church conference vote because it's out of order. So our next best option was to try to use the neutral principles of law, where we simply ask our church council to allow for the vote, meaning you can pass any corporate resolution to say anything. Our corporate resolution, which I can read or not, or actually I'll post it for you so you can put it on the screen during this conversation, but okay. It kind of ran through a history and said, we want the 2023 directory to vote. And we needed to do it before March 5th, because that's when they were going to call a charge conference and do exactly what they did on January 6th. On March 5th, they were going to call a charge conference, nominate people from the floor. I said excommunicate all the people that had been speaking out against or for disaffiliation and really control council at that point. Mm-hmm. We had 3 council members quit after our preacher's October 29th letter that said we're staying in UMC. 3 just left. So then we didn't have the numbers anymore if you just look at the hard vote that occurred in August. So asking nominations to do its job, we had 3 people presented on January 6th. And that's when it all kind of went haywire. That meeting is on the YouTube church's website, but we've never voted on council members in a charge conference. We've always taken nominations, people, and affirmed them. If you go watch old charge conferences, that district superintendent says, this is a slate of officers. You say yay, I say yay, we're all good, we move on. That part of the meeting took an hour and a half, and they had a lot of intentions. I know we're coming up on the time. I want to read through this quickly, but one of the council members that made it and then was so disgusted wrote a letter in, and I'd like to read part of his letter. Do you have any questions about?
No. Well, we'll try and do some more clarification, but I think the letter is important. So please go ahead and do it.
Okay. So this member that left said, I hope this email finds you well. He's addressing our senior pastor and our church administrator. It comes with a heavy heart to have to send this email just a few short days after being elected to church council. Again, we had an election at church council, at charge conference. I did not make this decision lightly and have spent the last few days thinking and praying over whether or not I should stay on after everything that transpired Monday night. This is January 6th. And after much deliberation, my heart is telling me and God is telling me that I should move on. I imagine that a lot of words, emotions, and opinions have been thrown your way throughout this week, and it's not my intention to pile on. However, I do think it's important to at least share my thoughts in this email because the events of Monday night are certainly the reason for my resignation. It was incredibly clear from the very start of Monday's meeting what certain people's motives and intentions were, and it became more severe and more pervasive as the night drug on. I was honored and humbled to hear that I had been nominated and voted by a panel of my peers to serve on the Council of Belin. I was ecstatic to get started on this journey and do everything in my power to work in the role for council and grow and improve Belin to even greater heights than it had already reached as both a church and a community. However, after spending 3+ hours watching and listening, everything changed. We all knew going into Monday night that there was a hot button issue, which is the corporate resolution that I hope you'll post to be addressed related to the United Methodist Church and Belin's affiliation. I also knew going in that there were different opinions and somewhat of a dichotomy between the members of the church as to their personal views and preferences as to the subject as well. But at the end of the day, this was Belin, not just any church, but Belin, the church I've known and loved my entire life, held to a higher standard than most, and I was confident that we would be able to use the greater good to work through these lesser issues. We are all children of God after all, and that is what is most important. We should be able to civilly discuss any issue without insults, harassment, threats, ploys, tactics, and puppeteering. But unfortunately, it appears I had too much optimism in hindsight as the meeting opened my eyes to the aforementioned. For starters, the onset of the meeting was supposed to be the most simple part of the whole meeting. Approve the members of council who had been chosen and elected by the nominating committee to serve. Our lead pastor chairs that committee. And I think that's the way it works in every United Methodist church. So through prayerful discernment, multiple weeks of calls, these are the people that they have put forth. From the get-go, not just my name, but every other name that was chosen was immediately subject to false accusations and mudslinging, and in a setting that wasn't even defensible. As you recall, you cannot speak if you're not on council, and the district superintendent was in charge of this part of the meeting. So to say that those members were not real members, or they were chosen specifically for voting, or were not qualified was insulting and purely outrageous. In case you're curious, I feel that I myself am incredibly qualified to serve in any role or capacity at Belin. Although I did not get the chance to belt off my resume or qualifications at the meeting, like the methodical floor nominations, I will tell you that there was every reason for myself and every other nominee that was selected to be there, other than being named just to stockpile votes or considered not real members. And he goes through his resume. So in conclusion, he says, so to hear those comments being made was insulting and heartbreaking, to say the least. And unfortunately, that was just the beginning of what ended up being a very disappointing night. It became more and more obvious as the night drew on what the real motive was by a handful of people to do anything and everything in their power to ensure a reasonable resolution got shot down but before it even had a chance. Baseless accusations were thrown around about motives and intentions, and disparaging comments were made toward people that I care about. And frankly, it became obvious that most of those people making the comments were in fact doing exactly what they were accusing others of doing. These are the last two paragraphs. In the appointment process through nominations, at the meeting, people were standing up accusing people of their false intentions or motives while simultaneously having prearranged or pre-prepared nominations and resumes ready to belt off that easily could have been made up or discussed prior to the charge conference. One side was getting accused of trying to stack counsel as they were standing up attempting to do the very thing they were accusing the other side of doing. One side was accusing the other side of trying to use scare tactics, intimidation, and fear while standing up and trying to scare, intimidate, and instill fear into their own side. One side came prepared to get the resolution shot down by the district superintendent before even attempting a discussion. And it's quite obvious that all of this was preconceived and meticulously planned and prepared. That is not what church is about, and that is certainly not what the Belin I know is about. He goes on, but talks about the puppeteering, control, hypocrisy, and partisan tactics that were displayed. And as I think about it, you go back and you say, well, how long ago was the puppeteering and the malicious activity started? Was it November 2023? That charge conference was a creation of our district superintendent and our conference. That wasn't supposed to be a charge conference. We weren't having any charge conference agenda items discussed other than somebody said from the floor without warning that I want a motion to get us out of discernment. That was never even on the agenda. We're not even sure under Robert's Rules of Order that that's fair. But Monday night, the 6th, was really a microcosm of what I think may have been happening at the conference level since 2015, 2017, 2018. As you think about it, you say, well, that's wrong. And now you see the Council of Bishops issuing letters where it says we're deplorable, racist, xenophobic, nationalistic, and anti-migrant if we agree with Donald Trump. So I texted someone and I said, can you no longer be a member of Belin if you're a Republican? And it shouldn't be political, but we're just saddened by 50% of our congregation or maybe more not having a place to worship just because we want to take a look under the hood and see what all our options are. But basically what we were presenting, and our church council leader, our church administrator, and our senior pastor was always BCC'd on every email I sent going through this resolution. I didn't have the resolution from the attorneys who were going to try to represent Belin if our board hired them. I didn't even have the resolution until like 10 days before January 6th. So we obviously have the holidays and everything else. So right when I got it, I sent it to the council chair and our church administrator. I met with them in my office. So then on January 6th, the whole ploy on my case was they're doing all this in the shadows. Nothing is on the up and up. And it was all done on the up and up because I met with attorneys. I said, what are all these other churches that aren't paying apportionment? What's their end goal? Because I knew after March 5th, Belin would have no option of entertaining the neutral principles of law and having their corporate board of directors leave. Because our board of directors was about to shift from, let's say, 50 members to 11 members. And how do those 11 members get appointed? At a charge conference or in nominations where we had less conservative people, presumably, that were going to be on after 1-1.
A lot of what you're describing is pretty common. There are a lot of things that separate churches and make them different from one another, but there are also a lot of things that just crop up everywhere, all over the place. One of the dynamics early on in your timeline that needs to be appreciated is there's a big incentive for clergy, retired or serving, to continue to stand with the United Methodist Church. There's a riding the brand loyalty thing, but there's also retirement dollars and appointment at stake. But also, it's been seen that a lot of clergy have been willing to be very heavy-handed in using the authority given them in the Book of Discipline to structure the committees as they want, to rearrange and commandeer meetings. One of the things that's just really clear is a lot of people in leadership in the United Methodist Church really are quite unscrupulous about manipulating groups to follow a script while using the language of democracy and allowing discernment and free discourse, it's anything but. And you find yourself all of a sudden having to make snap decisions on things that weren't on the agenda, and all of a sudden these structures are changing, and the people in power. I mean, it sounds like it was a pretty overt thing in Blaine, removing people from power that had been legitimately nominated and placed there. So
They
these are
weren't
things.
removed. They weren't removed. They just were then elected. You know, they nominate people from the floor,
Okay.
and there was an election process, which has never occurred at Blaine. But my thought is there seemed to be some concealment of information, and I think other people on YouTube have said that's fraud. In Tennessee, it's fraud, and we have breach of trust and different things, meaning to obtain money or property, you're concealing information from a position of trust. And we certainly trust our senior leadership, not saying it was there, but it could have been at the district superintendent level, or it could be at the South Carolina Annual Conference level, or the Council of Bishops level. I'm not sure, but it seems like there was some concealment of information. And I'm not going to be the one to pursue this further. I have tax season, 3 young children, and so much other stuff to spend my time on. But from a financial perspective, I wanted us to look at it to try to keep more people at Blaine for as long as possible. And I think their objective was to allow people to leave so that the discord would stop, understandably, but then you have half the size of the church, and you got to figure it out from there, where other churches 5 miles from us are getting the opportunity to figure it out in a different manner. So where I think it goes from here for South Carolina churches is the easiest way out will be the neutral principles of law using a corporate resolution like we prepared. I hope during my whole talk you'll post that so that people can use it, or you can point them in the right direction. But there's also an Auburn Methodist case where they're using third party standing. You know, we're a religious nonprofit and we don't have members per our corporate charter of 99, but we operated as a religious association. And my thought is, well, just this is a Supreme Court case. If you were the Peach Growers Association of South Carolina, and they're also peach grower associations of North Carolina and Georgia, but they conspire to send in leadership that lobbies against the peach pickers that actually send the dues in. You may not own a piece of the national organization, the farms they own, or anything else, but you still are the due paying agents of that organization. So third party standing would say if they give you a bad deal at the leadership level, that peach pickers can still band together and sue the higher ups at a conference level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
It-
third.
so much
It's
of this is
third.
just it's hard to speak with certainty about the likelihood of success about any of this stuff. And so I just want to
Absolutely.
make clear that neither you nor I are offering legal advice, but we're just spitballing ideas of different ways to look at this and examine this, and maybe ways that local churches might find helpful in just kind of ruminating on potential ways forward. So, but yeah, what you've lifted up a great number of concerns around not sharing information in order to gain material goods, um, potentially being open to misuse designated funds. There are a number of things to folks keep your eyes on your church about, because if that trust is betrayed, then that's something that needs attention. Just because you're loyal to, I mean, here's where it gets kind of theological, but when you honor your father and mother, that doesn't mean that you worship them and you believe that they're perfect in all the ways. And whenever you honor your membership vows, that doesn't necessarily mean that you ride the brand in all the ways and that you agree that everything the denomination does is perfect. And indeed, I don't think it's dishonest to say I'm going to honor you by holding you accountable. You know, I'm gonna honor you more than you're honoring yourself right now. And that can be a loving way to be in covenant with someone who's behaving very hatefully in the moment, and that's how I would characterize it.
Well, I don't even know if they were acting hatefully. I mean, I think our senior pastor is a great guy. I think he thought he was doing the right thing, or a lot of people do. But when we left that meeting, I said, this is one thing of 1,000 things. I hope we can still be friends. I respect you as a person. And certainly, this doesn't have to be all that guides our relationship. But I wanted to make sure that we at least knew the information to make an informed decision. And like you said, I thought it was only the right thing to do and a respectful thing to do to tell them what I was looking at, and that I wanted to question his authority or their authority at the conference level, just to make sure there was a check and balance on things as we went through these uncharted waters. So didn't mean I didn't like my father or mother or my senior leadership. I just wanted to take another look, and I hope he was okay with that. Our church administrator was there too, and I wanted him to be clear that I wasn't trying to do anything behind their back.
So you've been clear that you're a full-time CPA, you're a professional, you need to spend time on that. You got kids, you're not going to be one of the main people pressing the case of those who are interested in having the conversation. Is Friends of Blaine still open on Facebook? Are they the main ones, or is it now disbanded and it's just all over? What's going to happen, do you think?
Yeah, we joke about it because people got on Facebook and said the BMC is the Friends of Blaine. It really wasn't. We found out because of the cease and desist order they served the Friends of Blaine that we could use the church directory. And a group of us there were still members that were on Friends of Blaine, but it's entirely different people pulling the strings. But because people don't want to be persecuted or excommunicated, they didn't want to put their name at the bottom of the email. I did send out too many emails to a bunch of people that were BCC'd and asked their permission. But I think there will be a Blaine Methodist Committee or Blaine Memorial, call it whatever. But the BMC, I think, will continue if the attorneys give us a clean bill of health to move forward. I would love to stay engaged, but I'm not going to be the one, pushing things. But I think we'll have to see how the Auburn Methodist case works out, how third party standing works its way out. But the thing that's encouraging to me is that you would bring suit against the conference, that you would not bring suit against your church, that a separate group of peach pickers band together, collect money. I think Auburn formed a 501c3 to do it in a tax deductible manner, but that group sues the conference level. And I hope other attractive churches or churches that care that have been infiltrated. Other churches in South Carolina are going to be able to leave just by voting the corporate board of directors. But if you have an attractive church that was infiltrated at an earlier time where the council was changed or that dynamic there has been lost or people have quit, I think those churches are going to have to look at third party standing, which is going to be a lot more expensive, a lot more arduous, and see where we go from there. But I hope they band together and at least take a look at it.
Yeah, well, that sounds perfectly reasonable. We always try and keep these things to an hour, and I'm sure there's a lot more details that could be covered. Maybe a follow-up is in order, but it sounds like you're needing to focus on other things. So what I want to do at this point, friends, is just say a prayer for Dan Temple here and the friends at Blaine, and then I'll say a couple closing notes. But Dan, is it okay if I close with a prayer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Father, I thank you for Dan taking the time just to explain to others in the same situation or just others who care about the situation that his church is in and the different chapters that have unfolded. Father, I have heard of churches that have been a lot nastier, but of course, there have been a lot of churches that managed to do all of this above board and be transparent and respectful. And Father, it just feels so deflating and discouraging to have all these years of partnership and respect and ministry in the United Methodist Church that fell apart as soon as these divisions came up. And I thank you for people who stepped up to the task of serving faithfully and trying to be adults in the room, even whenever there was politicking and manipulating. Father, we know that on this side of heaven, no institution is going to be pure as long as humans are involved, but we do believe in the power of your Holy Spirit to make people behave better than they would otherwise and to make churches places that are actually holy. And Father, we pray that blessing upon the Blaine Church and the people. We know that it's a time of coming apart, and realistically, not everybody's going to hold on, but we pray, Father, that if there is still a way that this can all glorify you and edify the body of believers there, that you would see fit to make that happen. Father, may this be something that doesn't burn people and turn them off to church forever, but something that actually helps them to mature in faith and become the people needed for the next chapter, whether they are in this church or another church. Help equip them, Father, for faithful service, not just when times are easy, but whenever things are amping up. Help them to be vigilant, help them to be faithful, help them to be gracious, but also firm and what your standards are and what the church should look like. Father, we trust you with the future. You are the God of history. Just bless Dan and all who love their church and are trying to serve soberly and faithfully. Give them comfort in their spirits that even if the church is dysfunctional, that you still are enthroned above and you are God. And Father, we submit all this to you. Glorify yourself in their midst, in all our midst. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Dan, God bless you and your church. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and thank you, friends, for spending time with us. I hope this has been a benefit to you. The heart of this really is I do not want people going, we're going to war, we're getting a lawyer, we're going to lawfare. My intent, my heart is just for you folks to know that there are other churches and situations just like yours, and to be able to feel like you are sharing a burden with others and sharing in knowing what's going on. So that's always been the purpose here. I am not a lawfare person, and I don't advocate any particular strategy, but I do want to share good information. I think, Dan, you've been very helpful in doing that. So thank you so much, brother.
Happy to do it. Have a good day.
Yes, sir. You too. Bye, friends.